The station was supposed to feel like a fortress. Late-night radio had rules that didn't care how you looked, who you were, or what kind of background you came from. You stepped behind the microphone, and the city outside became an indistinct blur. Static swallowed doubt. A playlist could keep your heart in its assigned lane. I had built my routine around that. Caleb Mercer, one man in a second-hand booth with a red ONAR light that made everything else go quiet. Every night, I took calls from strangers who needed to be heard more than they needed to be judged. I read their stories into the speakers like a promise. You can say it here. Someone will stay with you. The first time the signal failed, it didn't feel dramatic. Just a hiccup in the line, like the station itself. Had taken a breath and forgotten how to exhale. I checked the console. I swapped cables. I told myself it was nothing I couldn't fix between midnight and 1. But then, as if the city had leaned closer to listen, the broadcast started to warp. A steady hiss turned into a thin, wavering whine. When I tested the tone, the sound came back like it had traveled through water. Listeners messaged, screened in from social media, forwarded through the station's old email thread. Are you still on? We can hear the music, but not your voice. My dad says you're cutting out, like the universe doesn't want you to talk. I answered the messages with calm sentences. I always did. I typed with the same careful patience I used on air. It wasn't that I lied. It was that I couldn't afford panic. Panic was for the daylight, for the kind of life that didn't have headphones and schedules. At 1:18 a.m. I went outside. The building sat on a narrow street where other people went to sleep and stayed asleep. My windowed studio was on the second floor, and the antenna mast was on the roof. Old hardware, the kind of thing you inherited when you volunteered to keep the lights of something unglamorous burning. The landlord called it historic. The station manager called it maintenance. I called it that thing that always worked until it didn't. The night air smelled like damp asphalt and cold metal. My keychain felt too loud in my palm. I climbed the back stairs, careful not to jolt the railing, and pushed through the door to the roof access. From up there, the skyline was a scatter of windows. Somewhere below, someone's TV murmured. The antenna had a small bend at the base of the array. It looked subtle in the dark, like a bruise you might miss if you weren't the kind of person who studied yourself for signs. I held my flashlight under my chin, squinting. The metal was slick from condensation. I crawled closer, bracing my weight, and when my hand touched the bracket, I felt how loose it was. The whole thing had shifted just enough to ruin the signal. I thought of calling someone. I thought of the station's limited budget. I thought of my own hands, the way they were steady when I had to be, and how they weren't always brave in the places where injury mattered. Then I heard footsteps on the roof stairs, measured, not rushed. A pause, like the person was deciding whether to knock or just appear. "Hey!" a voice said. It wasn't the voice of a stranger to my building. It was familiar, in the way weather is familiar. Always in the background, sometimes annoying, sometimes necessary. "Jasper," I called, and my voice came out thinner than I wanted. From the roof access door, a silhouette approached with the confidence of someone who belonged to tools. The flashlight beam landed on a face I recognized from the hallway. Jasper Holt, the neighbor who always carried himself like he had somewhere important to be, even when he was just taking out the trash. He worked with radio's technician work for local businesses, and when he had time, helping people like me who didn't have time. He stepped closer, his shoes whispering on the gravel. His cap shadowed his eyes. "You're up here," he said, as if I was the strange thing and not the antenna. "I think the bracket's loose," I told him. "It's cutting out. You can probably hear it from your place." Jasper's mouth tilted. "I can hear everything from my place." Then he glanced at my flashlight and the angle of the mast. You shouldn't be wrestling that alone." "I'm not." I started, but the sentence didn't finish because I didn't know how to say, "I'm trying not to admit that I'm scared of falling." I didn't know how to say I'm trying not to admit that I don't ask for help until the harm is already done. He crouched near the antenna with the ease of someone kneeling beside a friend. "Show me what you touched." I leaned in, and the closeness surprised me. On air, I was all distance and voice. In person, the world insisted on physics. Jasper smelled like clean soap and metal dust. The scent threaded into my thoughts until I couldn't think around it. I swallowed. I checked the cables in the booth. I didn't come up here until it started getting worse. Jasper's hands moved with quick, precise care. He tightened a bolt, tested the wobble with the back of his knuckles, then looked at me. "You've got that radio steady hand, but you don't have the roof steady hand." "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means you're talented, but you're too polite to take up space," he said, and the way he said it wasn't cruel. It was accurate, which somehow made it hurt. I wanted to laugh it off. I wanted to tell him he didn't know me that well, but he did know me enough to see where my body lied to my pride. He shifted closer, and when his shoulder brushed mine, it was so small that my brain tried to pretend it wasn't anything at all. It felt like a spark in a room built for silence. "You're shaking," he added. "I'm not," I lied. Jasper didn't argue. He just reached for a different tools, something with a longer handle that let him work without leaning in as much. His avoidance was gentler than confrontation. I realized then that the kindness in him wasn't accidental. He'd made a life of noticing how close things were to breaking. "Let's get you a steady angle," he said. "Come up on the other side." I obeyed without thinking. Our movements lined up. Roof gravel pressed cold against my shoes. The city air cooled my neck and the radio hum in my bones. Habit always made the silence feel louder. He tightened another bolt. "You have a call sign?" he asked. I blinked. Call sign? On air? Do you introduce yourself like, 'This is Caleb with station'?" He stopped himself like he'd said too much, then corrected. "People always say it's about anonymity, but I can tell you don't want to disappear." I didn't know what he could tell from a radio light and a few laughs. "I'm Mercer," I said. "That's my name." "I know," Jasper replied. "I heard you last week. You were talking to a guy who said his boyfriend hates his hometown. You were patient with him. You didn't lecture. You didn't fix. You just stayed." My stomach tightened. It felt like being caught doing something private, even though it had been broadcast into the air for anyone to hear. "You weren't listening," I said. "I am always listening," he answered, and it was the kind of honesty that didn't ask permission. I had never considered that my voice reached into his life. I'd assumed the hallway neighbor version of Jasper existed at a safe distance, separate from the man who was hearing my pauses and choosing whether to admire them. We worked for 10 minutes, maybe less. Time on a roof didn't behave like normal time. Every adjustment carried weight. Every quiet gap in conversation, filled with the knowledge that we were two men standing close enough that the smallest mistake could bruise more than pride. Finally, Jasper stepped back. He checked the bracket again, then looked at the mast, as if listening to it. "Okay," he said, "go turn it on." I hesitated. The idea of climbing back down felt like leaving something that hadn't even started properly. "You're coming." Jasper's eyebrows rose. "You want me to come?" The question felt like a door, not a trap, not a challenge. Just an opening. "Yeah," I admitted. The word slid out before I could dress it up. "I'd feel better." He stood, and his presence took up space in the stairwell like it always had. We went down together, and the building seemed to hold its breath with us. In the studio, I flipped switches with a reverence I usually reserve for microphones. I connected the test tone and listened through the headphones. The hiss smoothed, the warped sound resolved into something clean. My voice returned in the speakers, warm, clear, mine. I exhaled so hard it stung. Jasper leaned against the wall near the console, his posture relaxed, but his eyes watching my face. "There," he said, "fixed." I stared at the meters, as if they could tell me what I should do with my heart. "Thank you," he shrugged. But his eyes didn't soften. "Don't thank me like it's charity." "What else is it?" "It's you asking for help without making it a performance," he said. "That's hard for some people." I thought of how I pretended competence was the same thing as control. I thought of how my voice on air was patient because I didn't know how to be anything else when someone needed me. He looked at me again, and for a moment I wondered if he would say something like, "You're beautiful," or "You're lonely," or something that would force the truth out of me like breath after a swim. Instead, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced at it, then frowned. "I've got to be up early," he said. A part of me mourned the word early. Another part of me panicked at the feeling of mourning. I didn't have room for this kind of tenderness. My whole routine depended on it being simple. "Okay," I said quietly. Jasper picked up his tools, then paused at the door. "Before you go back to talking to strangers," he added, "should know I'm not who people assume I am." I turned. "What do people assume?" He didn't answer immediately. The silence stretched between us, thick with the kind of confession that was both thrilling and terrifying. Then he said, "They think I'm just the straight guy next door." The sentence landed like a test tone. Clean on the outside, vibrating with meaning underneath. I didn't know how to respond without making it worse. If I said, "Oh," I didn't know, would it sound careless? If I said, "I'm glad," would it sound like I was inviting something? If I said nothing, would it mean I didn't care? So I asked the safest question I could manage. "And what are you?" Jasper's jaw tightened. "I'm trying to be honest without wrecking everything." I stared at him, and my mind flashed through the narrow hallway between our apartments. Through the times I'd seen him smile at someone else. Through the way I'd tried to interpret his distance as disinterest. "I don't want to wreck your life," I said. "You don't get it," Jasper replied, and his voice softened. "I'm the one who's been wrecking parts of it, just quietly." I thought I could live with the mess. The station light reflected in his eyes. A red glow made him look like he belonged to the same world as the on-air sign, always watched, always judged, always performing something. I swallowed. "If you're trying to be honest," I said, "then be honest with me." Jasper's lips parted, and his gaze flicked to my mouth like he was checking if words would get him hurt. He exhaled. "Okay," he said, "I'll try." When he left, the studio became a museum of the almost. The antenna worked, but my chest felt misaligned. I answered calls on air like usual. I kept my voice calm when listeners thanked me for staying clear through the crackle, but inside I kept replaying what he had said. Straight guy, next door, honest, without wrecking everything. My producer wasn't here that night. Late shifts were only for volunteers and people who didn't need sleep. The booth was mine, and the air was mine, and the silence was mine. Until a message popped up on my screen, not from a listener. Rowan Bennett. Rowan was the one who managed the station's community schedule in the daytime. He wasn't there as often, and when he was, his presence felt like warmth in a room that had forgotten what comfort looked like. Rowan had kind eyes and a way of speaking that didn't demand agreement, only consideration. The message was simple. He fixed it. I stared at it. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. Rowan had never asked about Jasper before. The station had always been my place to let the outside world stay outside. Yeah, I texted back a minute later. Be careful. My throat tightened. Careful? From what? From my feelings? From Jasper's? From the kind of class divide that made people pretend they didn't notice differences in accent, in income, in how quickly someone could leave the room when they were uncomfortable. I typed another reply. You. Rowan's response came slower. Because you don't notice how close you are to breaking yourself, and he's been pretending he can breathe without anyone seeing. That was the first time I understood I wasn't the only one in this story with secrets. I thought of Jasper's words, trying to be honest without wrecking everything. Then I thought of Rowan's. Be careful. The night continued. Calls poured in. People asked for advice about love, like love was a problem that could be solved with patience and playlists. I offered words that sounded easy because that was what I did when I was afraid. At 3:07 a.m. the door downstairs creaked. Footsteps climbed. The station manager's key was in a locked box. No one was supposed to be here. I paused the broadcast and leaned toward the intercom. Rowan, I called. But a different voice answered. It's me, Jasper. My heart stuttered. I pressed stop on the phone line and waited. Every second stretched thin as wire. He pushed in without asking permission. The hallway light behind him framed him like a silhouette from a dream I didn't trust. I forgot something, he said. What? He walked closer to the booth, and the closer he got, the more my mind tried to sabotage me with questions. Why now? Why after leaving? Why pretend it was accidental? He set a small wrench on the counter. I left this. The wrench looked deliberate in his hand. You came back, I said. I know, Jasper replied. I waited for his explanation. A sentence that would let me step back into safety. Instead, he looked at me the way he had on the roof. Like I was someone worth careful attention. Caleb, he said softly. Hearing my name from him felt like a hand on my ribs. Listen, Jasper continued, voice low. You don't have to do anything with me. I'm not here to trap you. I'm here because I don't like the person I was when I was pretending. I swallowed hard. Pretending what? Jasper's eyes lifted toward the ONAR sign. Pretending that my life fits inside my idea of normal. The confession was careful, but not distant. It carried the weight of someone who had built walls and was now tired of stepping over rubble. I don't understand, I admitted. You will, he said, then stopped. He was deciding whether to risk the next step. I'm not straight, he said finally. There it was, unavoidable now. The truth he had been carrying like a radio signal under his clothes. My chest tightened. I couldn't breathe in the space between us. Okay, I whispered, because it was the only response my body could produce. Jasper flinched as if okay wasn't enough. I'm not asking you to say anything, he rushed. When I heard you in your booth, it wasn't the voice. It was the way you stayed when people were scared. I thought if there's a place where honesty matters, it's here. I stared at him. His hands were in front of him like he was offering them, like he could take back his touch if I told him to. Jasper, I started, but my voice broke. He watched me carefully, not pushing. You don't have to be brave. I can just leave. He said it like leaving was a kindness he'd already decided on. And that's what made it impossible to stay indifferent. Because I realized that my whole life, my whole station voice, had been built on the fear of being the wrong kind of person. The fear that if I asked for what I wanted, I would be rejected for wanting it. I didn't want to reject him. I didn't know how to ask for him either. My mind flashed to Rowan's message. You don't notice how close you are to breaking yourself. I looked at Jasper's face, The way his eyes searched mine, like they were learning how to read me. "I've been pretending too," I confessed, and it shocked me how quickly the words came. "Not about my orientation. I've been pretending I don't need anything beyond this booth, that I can keep my heart in headphones and calls." Jasper's mouth parted slightly. "And do you need more?" "Yes," I said. "I think I do." It was too honest, too raw. Too close to the kind of truth that made everything else in life tremble. Jasper stepped forward 1 inch, then stopped as if he'd hit a boundary line drawn in invisible tape. "What do you need?" he asked. I could have said, "Say you want me." I could have said, "Tell me you're not going anywhere." I could have said, "Hold my face and let me forget the rules." Instead, I told him something truer and more complicated. "I need to know you're not ashamed," I said. "I need to know you can want me without thinking you're betraying yourself. And I need to know I'm not too much." The last words came out like a confession of my class differences, my upbringing, the way I'd learned to shrink my wants until they fit the space between other people's expectations. Jasper's face softened in a way that made my eyes sting. "I'm ashamed of nothing," he said. "I'm terrified of hurting you. I'm terrified of what it'll look like in daylight." "People can be cruel in quiet ways, cultural differences," I said, and the phrase tasted like a lie. We weren't just different categories on a form, we were two men with different histories, different ways of learning safety. Jasper nodded slowly. "Exactly." We stood there and listened to the station's hum. Somewhere outside, the city continued moving. Somewhere else, someone's morning shift was already starting. Rowan wasn't here, but his warning lingered. I wanted to ignore it. I wanted to believe this could be simple. But the truth was never simple, not for us. Jasper reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a tiny folded piece of paper. It looked like something he carried for days. "What's that?" I asked. "It's a frequency." He unfolded it just enough for me to see. "Not ours, another one. My dad used to listen to when he worked night shifts. It's station that doesn't exist anymore. I rebuilt the receiver for it, just so I could hear it sometimes." I stared at the numbers. "You're giving me your nostalgia," I said, trying to sound lighter than I felt. "No," Jasper replied. His voice dropped. "I'm giving you my proof. I didn't just break rules on purpose. I learned what it's like to keep something alive, even after it stops being convenient." His words were gentle, but they landed like a vow. My throat tightened. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I want you to understand me without my jokes," Jasper said. "I want you to understand I've been waiting for someone to look at me and not treat me like a secret." I couldn't deny the truth swelling in me. I stepped closer, close enough that I could see the tiny lines at the corners of his eyes, close enough that the scent of him filled my lungs. "I'm a secret, too," I whispered. Jasper's breath caught. "I don't think I'm brave," I continued. "I think I'm just tired of pretending the part of me that wants you is a malfunction." For a moment, Jasper didn't move. His hands hovered, unsure if he was allowed to touch. Then he reached for my wrist, not grabbing, not claiming, just connecting. The contact was electric because it wasn't about desire alone. It was about consent. It was about choosing, again and again, to be careful. "Can I?" he asked. I closed my eyes for half a second, not because I wanted to hide, but because I needed my body to catch up to my heart. "Yes," I said. Jasper kissed me like he was learning the shape of the word honesty. Not hungry, not frantic. Patient, like someone who understood that affection could be an act of respect. The kiss was tender and brief, and yet it rewired something in me. It made the booth feel warmer, like the on-air light wasn't just broadcasting my voice. It was illuminating the things I'd kept in shadow. When we pulled apart, both of us looked at each other as if we were checking whether it had happened. Jasper swallowed. "I'm sorry," he said. "For what?" "For how long I waited," he replied. "For how I used to watch you like I was only allowed to admire." Laugh escaped me, small and broken. "I did that too." Jasper's eyes widened a little. "You?" I nodded. "I listened to you. Watched how you handled people who were hurting, and I told myself it was normal to be moved, that I could admire you without wanting," Jasper finished. "Without wanting," I agreed. The air between us felt fragile, like glass. If we moved too fast, it would shatter, so we didn't. We sat on the edge of the booth, knees nearly touching, and talked in the way people do when they're trying to build a bridge out of words. Jasper told me about his family, how his community prized stability and routine, how being different was treated like a sickness you could cure with distance, how he'd learned to present as straight because it was easier than arguing about who he was. I told him about mine too, not as a tragedy, but as the architecture of my fear, the way my childhood taught me that wanting things loudly invited consequences, the way I'd learned to hide my tenderness behind competence. When we reached the subject of culture and class, neither of us romanticized it. "It's not just who we love," I said. "It's who we become in public." Jasper nodded. "And I can't promise people won't judge. I can only promise that I won't judge you for how careful you are." I looked at him, and the tenderness in my chest became something steadier. "I can't promise I won't get scared," I admitted. "That's fine," Jasper said. "Scared doesn't mean you're lying. It means you care." We listened to the station's quiet after that, the kind that felt like a held breath. Eventually, my phone vibrated with a new message. Rowan again. "Did he stay?" I stared at the screen until my eyes blurred. I didn't know whether to tell Rowan the truth immediately. Part of me wanted to protect the softness we'd earned. Part of me wanted accountability, a witness, someone who could see whether we were real. I typed, "He's here." And then, "And we're trying to be honest." I hit send. Jasper saw my face change and leaned in slightly. "You told him?" "I didn't want to keep it secret," I admitted. "If I want honesty, I can't just demand it from you. Have to practice it." Jasper's smile was small. "That's the first brave thing you've done all night." I rolled my eyes, but my lips still trembled. "You're brave too." "I don't feel brave," he said. "I feel like I'm stepping into cold water." "Then we'll warm up together," I replied before fear could stop me. The words sounded like a promise, not a line. Jasper looked at me the way you look at someone who finally says what your heart has been begging not to lose. In the early hours, we returned to the microphone without pretending we were just co-workers. We turned the on-air light back on and took one more caller, an older man who said he didn't know if his marriage could survive the truth. Jasper and I listened, shoulders nearly touching. When the caller asked for a simple answer, I didn't give one. I gave what I could. Patience, honesty. The idea that love might be complicated, but it wasn't allowed to be cruel. As we stayed with the caller's pain, I realized that we weren't different worlds at all. We were just different dialects of the same human need. After the call, Jasper rested his head against my shoulder. The gesture was quiet, intimate, without asking for spectacle. I turned my face slightly so I could look at him. "You're not leaving, are you?" I asked. Jasper lifted his head. "Not tonight," he said. I nodded slowly, letting myself believe it, for one night only, because hope was sacred and fragile. When dawn started to seep into the windows, Jasper finally stood. He offered me his hand, like we were making an agreement, not a goodbye. "I'll come back after work," he said. "We'll figure out daylight. We'll figure out what people do when they find out their assumptions were wrong. I squeezed his hand. And if daylight scares me? Then we'll be scared together, Jasper replied. Kissed me again, gentler this time as if sealing the promise. Then he left. Station went quiet. The antenna signal held steady. The city woke up. But something in me didn't return to the old routine. I couldn't go back to pretending that love was a thing you watched from behind glass. I opened the email thread for listeners and wrote one final message to the people who had noticed the static. We're back. Thanks for staying. Then, in the space where I wanted to write something about me, I wrote something about us. Not a confession meant for the public, a note meant for him. Stay honest with me. I'll stay patient with you. When I hit save, I realized that honesty wasn't a one-time act. It was a practice. And for the first time, I wanted to practice it with someone brave enough to climb onto a roof in the cold and fix what was breaking without pretending he wasn't doing it for the person standing underneath.